once you have, as it were, a method, then this method will create repetition. It will create, it will regenerate the same point of view. Indeed, one very audacious philosopher of science called Paul Feyerabend once published a book with the title Against Method. What is a method? A method, in Greek again, it means just road. And once you have chosen that road, once you are taking for granted that road, then of course all you can do is to repeat yourself in some sense. And there are architects, there are painters who succumb to it in the sense that they have found that roads are called at a certain moment and then they keep reproducing themselves. A very well-known example in architecture in our time is a man like Richard Meyer, for example. Not that I have personally anything against him, he's a charming fellow, but he was a real promise at the early stage because he did make something that was more like that. And at a certain moment he adopted whatever he did as a kind of modular. He kept repeating it again and again, and we lost a great talent. In painting it occurs again. In truly great painters, usually you find many different periods. The most famous, of course, is Picasso with his blue period and pink and so on. It is true that he also changed his dog and he changed his wife every time. But be this as it may, what is clear is that one of the ways in which people refrain from falling into this trap is by changing style, is the moment they recognize that they have a style, that is the moment when they have to depart. In architecture, of course, we have the most illustrious case of Corbusier, that in the West there was a great alarm with Chandigarh. There was a great alarm with what became known as brutalism, yes, because brutalism seems to be coming from, where does it come from? And why should a man like this suddenly dropped his pristine white stucco walls and opt for such a rough material and so on? I believe that if there is a good reason for it, above all, is that reason, the reason which, for which a workshop like this is also a way out. It's a way to recuperate that quality. Indeed, I now started a new magazine called Potlatch, and in fact, Corbusier, on his way to the Punjab the first time, apparently he had one book in his suitcase, and that book was a book by George Bataille on the gift. And in the margin of that book, he wrote, that it took him such a long time and so much done already, and only now he realized that in fact that if he was doing anything, he was giving a gift, and there was no other way of measuring it. So the painter and the painter and the architect are certainly, if you like, they are almost condemned to give a gift, because the better they are, the less likely it is that they will have any compensation for it. Some people are lucky that they have found material compensation, and some people are lucky that they didn't find the material compensation. You see, because the essential thing is that which comes from you rather than that which you will gain in return. Again, be this as it may, the great lesson that we learn from Corbusier is the ability to open himself up. He had many ways to enable it, to make it possible for him. For example, one of his ways was indeed painting as painting. He would apparently spend all his morning painting, sometimes also making sculptures, and actually coming to the studio later on. More recent example is the example of my colleague and friend, Mr. Stephen Hall, who starts the morning not with a prayer, not with meditation, but with watercolors. And he makes these watercolors not necessarily as looking for a solution or something like this. He just make these watercolors, above all, to be in touch with himself. Above all, to reach that point of touching something not yet known. And that touching is that which enabling later on to develop a project or do something else. So there is many different people will find different ways to enable themselves to reach that point. This can be very varied, but the thing that they all have in common is the recognition that without the ability to return again and again to this point of origin in the conceptual sense, it is very unlikely that such a moment that allow that openness, that allow that aletheia, that such an openness will be possible. So, I could go on, but I would like to briefly sum up what I have presented to you, and hopefully we'll have a conversation so that I can learn more from this experience than just telling you what I know already. Essentially, I'm saying that if the world is what it is thanks to a generation of people who found a way to sing a poem, found a way to make whatever they were making in that original sense. And it is very easy, especially when you are young, and many more so when you are older, to accept the world as it is, as necessarily what it is must be as it is, and that's all there is to it. It is more difficult to step back and to question this kind of concept, almost to the point at which you, as it were, suspend the belief in the existence of the world, and perhaps only when you are able to suspend the belief in the existence of the world as it is, then that you make it possible for you to reach the possibility of making in that sense. And this, in fact, on this possibility, on this option, in fact, we are dependent if we have any hope for something other than it is. So I will stop here because I think it's be more worthwhile to have a conversation than to have a monologue. Okay.
Hi, thanks for your talk. Sorry, I'm a bit late. There seems to be a little bit of a tension in the last part of what you presented between the idea of repetition as being stuck in a method and repetition of an activity as a way to return again and again to what you call origin, and the idea of getting back to yourself through a repeated practice. I wondered if you could, if you'd like to sort of tease that out a little bit more, and what those kinds of repetition, different senses might point to.
Well, repetition is such an essential aspect of life that, of course, it carries so many meanings in so many different ways, because there is no life without repetition. And there is nothing that is more powerful than repetition. So much so that some people have been, I would say, a large part of culture, both East and West, believe that life consists in eternal reoccurrence, the eternal repetition. So this is the repetition in its largest dimension. And then there is a repetition in everybody's work. There is a sense of repetition in one way or another, there is no doubt about it. But I mentioned it, you're right, also in different contexts. In the context in which repetition is a mere repetition in the most mechanical sense, or in the sense in which